Holy History 1 Is everything historical in the history of this people? Copie traduit en anglais de histoire ste1 tout estil historique dans el histoire de ce peuple? 6 mn, https://u2.b/yf40u2elz7g. Holy History 1 Is everything historical in the holy history of the Hebrew people? Is everything historic in the history of the Hebrew people? So the question that arises is, does the Bible, the Old Testament in particular, and also the New Testament, tell the story with the accuracy of modern historians and possibly in scientific parts, the accuracy of modern scientists? Well, the answer is clearly no. That does not mean that everything is wrong, far from it. But we should not look for those texts that are first written by human authors, real authors, a series that is shared in the course of the history of time and which are also invisibly inspired by the Holy Spirit. Saint. We must not look for absolute truth in science, history, biology, cosmology, etc. It is not the goal. God does not want to make them infallible in these areas. The only area where God is committed to infallibility is to reveal what is useful, through the Old Testament, for salvation. For the Old Testament, it is the holy story. That is to say, God tells how He goes little by little, to purify a people, to make it pass from a barbaric mentality. It is the book of the Judges, and it is also the book of Moses. We go to see him, to a mentality of a just man, and it is Jean Baptiste the summit. Now it's happening through stories, and I'm going to prove by some examples that first of all at the scientific level it cannot be infallible. This is not the goal, do not look for it. For example, the first story of Genesis, which tells the creation of the world, seems scientific. It's impossible for him to be. For example, fruit trees are created before the sun is created the next day. Days that surely last for millions of years all the same. We are not going to say that it is objective days because anyway, the sun that measures the days is created only the next day. So it's impossible. Chlorophyll cannot be created after what gives life to it, namely sunlight. The sun is described as a simple lamp that illuminates the day to separate it from the night. The sun has a much more important role, obviously, gravitation, center of the earth, etc. The center of the solar system, etc. On the other hand, this text, on the plane of the doctrine of salvation, is formidable. He indicates that the sun is only a big lamp and not a god. So do not worship him. It is created by God, and that, from the point of view of the doctrine of salvation, is essential, it is infallible. Now, historically, we can say the same thing. There are many inaccuracies in the text, and I can name a few. For example, let's take the book of Exodus. A people of hundreds of thousands of men and women leave Egypt and camp 40 years in the desert. A desert that does not move, and we have no traces at all, archaeological traces of these in the desert. Indeed, we did not find anything. So maybe we can say that we will find out soon, and that the absence of proof is not a proof of absence. But all the same, it's a bit big. It is an important people. Some will conclude that all this is a legend. Be careful, do not go too fast. Remember the exodus of Hyksos. This people who had conquered Egypt at one time and was driven out by the Egyptians. A very important people whose names, it is particular Hebrew. Similarly, another inaccuracy, Joseph, sold in Egypt, Did he exist? Vizier of the Pharaoh, there are no traces of him. And yet, at one point we see that the Pharaoh calls him Vizier and gives him a new name, Tsaphnath-paneach, a name that has no meaning in Hebrew, no meaning in Egyptian. So there is an inaccuracy. And then it would seem that the name of the Vizier of Pharaoh Amenophis III, father of the future Akenaton, who invented monotheism in Egypt, well, he was called Amenophis, son of Apu. But a researcher, finding his name marked on a stele, found that it was written backwards in hieroglyph, which if read in reversed Tsaphnath-paneach. So there is an inaccuracy in the Bible. Those who investigated were mistaken in copying and translating Joseph's Egyptian name into Hebrew, but it refers to an accuracy, historically, it seems. So it's a search to continue. Professor Davinovich takes care of it on the internet, we can see it. So, if there are historical inaccuracies, it does not matter. What is obviously shown is the differences of mentality over time. For example, in the Book of Judges, we can see a Neolithic mentality, people who treat women like cattle, we can say. And it's written very frankly, by this people. No doubt ancient documents used by priests who shaped the Bible at Babylon, during exile, around 600 BC. And then, a little later, with other books, we see the mentality that has changed completely. The Book of Job manifests it. Misfortune can strike also the just, and this people is upset. So, an evolution of the mentality, and it really concerns the salvation, it prepares for the coming of Christ and visible, and there, the Holy Spirit infallibly inspires on the deep meaning of what He wants to reveal concerning the salvation.